Speaker.
Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and our province. And in that work, give us both strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors, presenting petitions, reading and receiving petitions, presenting reports by standing and special committees, notices of motions, introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 21, the Petroleum Marketing Statutes Amendment Act, 1985. This act amends the Mines and Minerals Act and the Petroleum Marketing Act to put into effect the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission's new role under crude oil deregulation as agreed to in the Western Energy Accord, specifically referring to Section 1.7 of that accord.
The Minister of Energy has moved first reading of Bill number 1, the Petroleum Marketing Statutes Amendment Act 1986. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? So ordered.
A bill being Petroleum Marketing Statutes Amendment Act 1986, introduced by Honorable Dr. Weber, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 22, the Petroleum Incentives Program Amendment Act 1986. As part of the royalty adjustments and royalty incentives announced in June 1985 by the Alberta government after the signing of the Western Energy Accord, it was decided to terminate the Alberta Petroleum Incentives Program on March 31st, 1986, some 9 months prior to the termination date, as was indicated in the September 1981 Energy Agreement, and to grandfather certain activities to December 31st, 1986. This bill is required to establish the termination date and the grandfathering provisions.
The Honourable Minister of Energy has moved first reading of Bill number 22, Petroleum Incentives Program Amendment Act 1986. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Petroleum Incentives Program Amendment Act 1986, introduced by Honorable Dr. Weber, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests. Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Solicitor General. My question is, Mr. Speaker, can the Solicitor General confirm that the real reason for the recent decision of the Minister's Department that there will be an automatic release of young offenders after they serve 1/3 of their sentence has a lot more to do with overcrowding at facilities than with the rehabilitation of young people?
Mr. Speaker, under the Young Offenders Act, the disposition for the young offender is under control of the judiciary. We have two levels of custody, secure custody and open custody. Not knowing the number of alleged perpetrators that may be before the courts and the particular disposition, it's difficult to tell from one time to another as to whether the secure custody will be a bit more populated at one time than the open custody. There's also a complication which I addressed during my estimates the other night, that it requires the judiciary's involvement to move a young offender from one level of custody to another, rather than through an administrative system that's prevalent in the adult population. We've addressed this issue with the Federal Solicitor General, requesting that he check this particular instance with other provinces to find out their experience and initiate an amendment to the Act if at all possible. Also, at the time of my estimates, I indicated that there is a young offender center being constructed in Edmonton and one in Calgary, both in excess of 100 beds, which will certainly alleviate any perceived problems.
Well, supplementary question. Mr. Speaker, the Minister is aware that there has been an increase since young offenders, longer sentences, and more people. I don't think we can build enough buildings, but my question is, how is the Minister monitoring the situation to ensure that the best interests of these young offenders and the public are served by the use of automatic temporary releases to deal with overcrowding?
Mr. Speaker, if the Honourable Leader was in the House some weeks ago, I gave actual numbers as to the number of young offenders that are held in custody in relation to the number of young offenders who are at large, and to not have the specifics, it was approximately 500 out of a population of in excess of 3,000 that are actually within custody. Again, if I may relate to the Act, the temporary release feature is for a period of 15 days only. Our department, in the interests of having the young offenders who are capable of being on a temporary release, have initiated a program and have had this program for some time, whereby we make the 15 days back-to-back in the interests of the young offender.
Yes, that's the problem that we're talking about precisely, Mr. Speaker. I've been told of cases in which teenagers who had been stabilized in special programs were yanked out before the end of the school year simply because they had finished one-third of their sentence. My question to the Minister is simply this. What steps is the Minister taking to assure that this policy is not stuck to in some mindless way that would hurt the young offender?
Yes, here. Mr. Speaker, we always have the interests of the young offender at heart. Again, I point out to the Honourable Leader that we have a number of young offenders out on the temporary release program. We have not yanked, as referred to, young offenders off the temporary release and out of educational programs at any time.
That is simply not the truth, Mr. Speaker. I can assure that. Mr. Speaker, well, you don't like the truth. That's too bad. My question to the Minister, according to a memo I have, the Correctional Services Division circulated a legal opinion that government residential centers and group homes don't have to be licensed under the Social Care Facilities Licensing Act. My question, in the absence of such basic standards, how is the department ensuring that the rights of children to proper physical conditions are being protected in these overcrowded situations?
Mr. Speaker, the allegations that the young offender pardon me, is being not adequately cared for in the group homes is a total erroneous statement. The group homes are very, very adequate. The group homes are monitored constantly by the Solicitor General departmental staff. and in no way is a young offender yanked from these programs unless the young offender has breached the conditions on which he is out on temporary release, which of course is then required.
Supplementary member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Yes, can the minister assure the House that younger children won't be housed with hardened older youth so as to minimize the recurrence of the recent situation at the Strathmore Detention Centre in which 18-year-old youth sexually assaulted a 14-year-old youth?
Mr. Speaker, again, the safety and educational concerns of the inmates are foremost in the plans as to where these particular young offenders are placed. It is unfortunate that that particular incident arose. Again, it was not from an undue mixing. There are people that have these propensities in all walks of life. We try to monitor those. Unfortunately, some of them do occur.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, I'd like to direct a second question to the straightforward, not shifty provincial treasurer, and I'll get some straightforward answers. Mr. Speaker, last week I referred to an IPEC discussion paper that was released on July the 16th. On page 8 of that document, they estimate that provincial energy revenues will decline about 60%, or $3.5 billion by 1987. My question to the Treasurer, is the Treasurer floating trial balloons about increased taxes because he has information that this estimate of 60% drop is correct, or is he still sticking to his budget prediction of a one-third drop?
Mr. Speaker, we are slightly more optimistic than the report which has been cited, and we believe that considering all the elements of the revenue flows to the province from resource revenue, including land sales and other royalties, that the one-third assumption is as accurate at the present time as any.
Slightly more optimistic is different from one-third to 60%. But one would think with a group like this that an estimate of a 60% drop would be quite alarming for the Treasurer. Has the Treasurer arranged to sit down with IPEC to look at their figures and review the information that they have about this huge drop in our revenues?
Mr. Speaker, through a variety of contacts, both Department of Treasury and the Energy Department are on almost a weekly basis monitoring variations in pricing and variations in royalty and land sales as they affect the overall revenue picture. And of course, the various cabinet committees, including the ministers directly responsible, have on an alert basis an information flow which takes place on a regular basis as well. While I can't say I've met directly with that particular group, I know my colleague, the Minister of Energy, in fact, has.
Well, supplement question to the Treasurer. Could the Treasurer indicate what other measures the government is considering to reduce the deficit besides higher Medicare premiums? Specifically, are we looking at income tax hikes in '87, and specifically, are we looking at a sales tax?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am glad to see that the opposition finally is concerned with the deficit. I noticed earlier in this session they introduced a bill to roll back the income tax increase, which could only result in an increased deficit. What kind of responsibility is that, Mr. Speaker?
Let's have some answers.
Whenever they don't want to answer the questions, they try to give off some right-wing rhetoric.
That's
My question then specifically, because by not answering the question, I think all Albertans will expect the worst in that one. My question is, the IPEC report highlights that our revenue problem is very much related to our energy policy. And again, my question to the Treasurer is this: will the Treasurer agree to do a study on a national floor price of between $18 and $22 US, with particular reference to our provincial revenues, which you will make public before announcing any new taxation measures?
Mr. Speaker, I know that the people of Alberta recognize the good management ability of this government. And in that context, no, that's a serious statement, and in that context, they know that this government is considering all alternatives on the fiscal side. We have a proven record of management of the resources of this province, and our record will continue through this difficult period, and we know that we can bet on the future of this province. We're optimistic, we're not pessimistic, and we have considered all elements of the fiscal plan will be taken into account when we strike the 1987 budget.
Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, since the cornerstone of a good management is an accurate budget, will the Treasurer explain to the Legislature why he is willing to ride out the next 9 months in a budget that is out of sync with the economic realities of the day, instead of acting immediately to redress the problem?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the member from Sturgeon suggests we make dramatic cuts in the people programs, then let him get up and recommend that.
Supplementary member for Little Bow.
Supplementary question to the provincial treasurer. It's with regards to the format that would be used in the budgeting process for the next fiscal year, not the present fiscal year. Is it the intention of the minister to establish some different format in terms of priority setting with regards to the government, or will the format that has been used in previous budgets be continued?
Mr. Speaker, we will be attempting a slightly different approach to setting the expenditure side. First of all, the province is in a very good financial position. We have the Heritage Fund, we have low debt, and we have a very good financial position to carry us through the next few years here, depending on agriculture and energy changes. And using and maximizing that resourcefulness of this province, we have a variety of options open to us. But I would think that the people of Alberta want to know that, first of all, we understand the problems we're facing. We are searching and reviewing a series of possibilities in terms of the fiscal side, including all the expenditure side, the borrowing side, and quite frankly, looking at some options with respect to additional revenue. Those must be considered, and the people of Alberta want us to show that we have that under control and are examining a series of possibilities. But we will have to, Mr. Speaker, I think, examine ways in which we set the expenditure priority, recognizing that in Alberta, some of the people services here are probably 150 to 170% above average in Canada. I think in some cases we have a substantial investment in so-called infrastructure, the public services which are provided to the people of Alberta, and I think some of these can be deferred. Many industrialized countries would like to have the investment we have in infrastructure, in hospitals and universities and sewer and water programs for that matter, and therefore some of these can be deferred without any difficulty to the economy.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, question to the Premier. From time to time during the past month, the Premier has promised this Assembly that various actions would be taken. To date, most of these actions are unfulfilled. For instance, apart from giving assurances, has the Premier taken any steps towards fulfilling his commitment to review the labour legislation?
Mr. Speaker, we've discussed that matter several times in the House, and as I said, the throne speech is clear. The Alberta government has set a course to review labour legislation. It's extremely important that it be done on a measured and careful way by having input from members of labour, members of management, and the public at large. Very shortly, we will be able to announce to the House how that review will be conducted, and will be conducted throughout the province, perhaps even outside of the province, in as thorough a way as possible.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, another commitment. Will the Premier fulfill the commitment he made to the House on July the 8th to table the agenda for the upcoming Premier's Conference?
It's been done, Mr. Speaker. It's been made public already.
Mr. Speaker, that's not so. It was a news release at which neither energy or agriculture was mentioned. There was no agenda tabled in this House. Has the Premier taken any steps to review the operations of Alberta government telephones in light of his commitment to ensure that AGT is not competing unnecessarily against the private sector?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Also along the promises, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, has he made a decision with respect to setting up a task force to review cost-cutting, a government proposal which he said he would consider in the July 18th Hansard?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Opposition, supplementary.
Well, supplementary question. I'll try to pick one of the questions that was supplementary, but to come back to the labor laws, could the Premier be more specific and tell us when he hopes to have this review over and ready to have legislation in the legislature?
As I said, Mr. Speaker, we will be asking a group of Albertans which we trust will be a very balanced group, both representing management and labor and citizens at large, and that they should do their job in the most detailed and thorough way possible. We would hardly try and get them to come up with something that wasn't adequately done by setting unrealistic timeframes for them. They would be asked, and I hope they would, fulfill their commitment to carry out their recommendations to the government with the utmost haste, but we will ensure also that they have the time to do it in a thorough and detailed way.
Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Stony Plain.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture. During the recent Western Premiers Conference, there was a call for a $1 billion deficiency payment to Western Canadian grain producers. I was wondering if the Minister could indicate what discussions have taken place with his federal counterpart to implement this particular decision and what progress has been made, if any, at this point in time.
Mr. Speaker, in responding to the honourable member for Little Bow, I can share with them at the outset that I hope to raise the topic again with the Federal Minister of Agriculture when we do have the opportunity to meet with him tomorrow here in our legislative office. In addition to that, we have had discussions with our federal counterparts. Unfortunately, to date, no specific action has been forthcoming, but we are continuing to pressure, and I know they are very sympathetic to offsetting some of the hardships that are caused with our agricultural sector.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to either the Premier or the Minister, and it's with regards to the Alberta government's position with regards to the deficiency payment. Has the government of Alberta recommended a specific formula for the payment, or is the government at this point in time supporting the concept in a general way?
In a general way, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to make it clear to the honourable member that there is no way that we can stand by as a nation and see other countries supporting their producers and literally devastating the producers of Canada. And therefore we feel that we have to first try and discuss on a common sense basis with these other nations, and then meet with the same type of tactics the type of subsidies that they are insisting on.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier, and I certainly agree that it's unfortunate what's happened in the world marketplace with regards to subsidies in other nations. Could the Premier indicate, in terms of his remarks, any type of a timetable that is being established? Are we looking at a deficiency payment for the crop of 1986, 87, or will the deficiency payment be based on the amount of pressure or crisis that possibly Western grain producers may face in terms of marketing in the fall of 1986 or in 1987?
Mr. Speaker, it was our intent to have the federal government considered in light of two factors. First, their success or lack of it with regards to negotiations with other countries, and secondly, by observing the state of our agricultural industry, and in particular how matters developed through the fall of 1986.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, back to the Minister of Agriculture, and point of view of his statement to the legislature here a couple of weeks ago that he supports the $10 per bushel base price as a support. Has he any studies to what he expects the price of bread will rise to in Edmonton if his two-price system goes into force?
Mr. Speaker, this is naturally under federal jurisdiction. We've indicated our support for it, recognizing the hardship that the farmers are facing, especially in the grain sectors. And I'd be curious to know if with his statement, if he's indicating now his opposition to the two-price wheat system.
Member for Vegreville.
Supplementary to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, has the Minister undertaken to express this government's support for the increased domestic price of wheat to representatives of the baking industry?
Mr. Speaker, I've indicated to a number of people our support for it, again, as I mentioned to the Honourable Member for Westlock Sturgeon, simply because we felt it would offset, even though to a limited degree, because we recognize only 10% of the wheat produced in Canada is consumed within Canada, so it's going to have a very marginal impact. But we wish to do everything we possibly can to offset the detrimental impact
that the subsidization by the U.S. and the European Economic Community have caused our grain producers. And I can share with both members that the impact on a price of bread or on a loaf of bread is going to be very small and very marginal as it relates to the overall impact that it could have for our farming population.
Member for Stony Plain, followed by the member for Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, a question to the Solicitor General. Given this government's support of the Better Buy Alberta program through the financial support extended to the Strategy for Improved Marketing, or the SIMS, and the Rural Agricultural Program, or RAP, would the minister respond as to whether this program could be extended to products contained in the Alberta Liquor Control Board in the interests of identifying those products made in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the Better Buy Alberta program is indeed endorsed by the government. The distilling industry in Alberta consumes a significant amount of agricultural products, and initially this type of program would seem suited to the Liquor Commission. However, the brewers and the distillers have advised the board that they wished no particular identity be given to products, in the fear that if this is contagious to other provinces where we have a far higher market penetration, and that penetration would be at risk. I bring to issue Ontario as an example. The losses would be greater than the gains, and so there's been a decision in conjunction with the industry itself not to have that identity in Alberta.
Member for Edmonton Highlands, followed by the member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask a question related to the document which was tabled in the House on Friday, the final report of the Federal, Provincial, Territorial Working Group on Wife Battering. The report recommends, amongst other things, adequate funding for shelters for battered women. And I'd like to ask the Minister of Social Services if she'd advise the Assembly why it is that the recommendations for adequate, as in core funding, were not met with her current budget.
Mr. Speaker, a very important question and a concern that is shared right across the province. I think the honourable member is aware that there has been a very significant increase at the the funding level for women's shelters. It is true that while we have identified essential services, there are a number of other services, including childcare and some counselling, that can't be totally paid for by the funding that has been allowed. If the cost-sharing aspect of the funding is met and there is some small community contribution, in fact, the shelters should be able to manage the full program.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I understand what the minister is saying. Will she give this House and the public of Alberta assurance that under provisions of her department, no battered women will be turned away from any of the existing shelters in this province?
Mr. Speaker, our assurances are that where there are battered women and others in the province in very dire need, if they, for instance, on occasion show up at a shelter, that there are peaking times, unfortunately, where you could find a shelter full. It doesn't happen very often. Most of the time there are vacancies. But that individual or family will immediately be housed by social services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then I wonder if I can ask a supplementary for the minister, from the Minister of Education. Again, with respect to this report, it has recommendations suggesting that it would be appropriate for high school curriculum to include programs which will inform students and discourage students about any procedure with respect to family violence and wife battering, and the response from the Minister's Department has been vague. Would she explain whether or not it's her intention to include, as a policy, curriculum development in this area?
Mr. Speaker, certainly within the structure of the Career and Life Management Program, which is part of a program that starts in grade 1 and moves through grade 12, this issue could be raised. I would be pleased to look into it for the honourable member and respond in a more definitive way at a later time.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary, if I might, to the minister responsible for the Women's Secretariat then. The report also contains recommendations with respect to a province-wide campaign, an information campaign again. Can the minister tell the Assembly when it is that this kind of campaign will get underway in Alberta to inform people that wife battering is a horrendous crime?
Mr. Speaker, that is a program that's being considered. I might indicate that in terms of education in general, it is the feeling of this government that it has to take place at all levels. That specific kind of program, though, is something that's being considered. I might add to the series of the honourable member's questions that the report that she has alluded to this afternoon represents significant increases in our assistance for that very serious problem in quite a number of ways, and we have an interdepartmental task force which continues to monitor and try and coordinate those programs. So I am pleased that we have indeed made the progress in a number of departments with respect to the difficulty. We will continue to do that through the Women's Secretariat and coordinate all efforts possible to make sure that this problem is one which fewer Albertans have to experience in the future.
Mr. Speaker, if I might just supplement my honourable colleague's answer, I think it's important, and it doesn't happen that the opposition ever raises some of the publications that are out, and I think it's important that we remind honourable members that they should share throughout their communities this booklet called Breaking the Pattern, because it is a very serious problem, and I think all communities should be apprised of this information.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Social Services, it said in the same report that the Interdepartmental Committee, a committee of the Government of Alberta, published a discussion paper called Alberta's Special Report on Family Violence, Ideas for Action in the fall of 1985. It was circulated, public input was solicited. Could the Minister please tell us what has become of the government's current review of those responses and of that report, and when they will be acting on it?
Mr. Speaker, the rather large, again, enhancement of the budget towards women's shelters was the first response to that report. I think it's fair to say that there are a great many ideas out there, some of them put together by way of the report as a result of communication around the province, and the report is worthy of further study. But initially, Mr. Speaker, our response is by enhanced funding, producing booklets, and there will be continuing discussion, exploring further ways, as a matter of fact, of looking at other items that could be budgeted for by a sharing with the federal government. And I think honourable members are aware that there is a concern with respect to the federal government's sharing of the costs of these kinds of programs, because at this point in time they have not okayed a form that we could utilize, hopefully, still keeping in mind that we want to keep the identities of a number of people private to them that are utilizing shelters.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by the member for Calgary North Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have 6 ongoing labour disputes in the province. The disruption is resulting in employment instability, increased policing, violence. The situation's out of hand, and what we're getting is assurances of a review.
Take your time.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier. Will the Premier tell us when he wants the labour legislation review to be presented to the House? Not as soon as possible. What is his target?
As soon as possible, Mr. Speaker.
The last refuge of a sinner.
Mr. Speaker, not good enough. The next question, Mr. Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Labour. Will the Minister then take some immediate action with respect to Alberta's deficient labour legislation by introducing an amendment to the Labour Act protecting the jobs of striking workers?
Mr. Speaker, I have explained before in the House that the protection of the jobs of those who are employees, that is, those who are working for an employer at the time that there is either a lockout or a strike, The jobs of those employees are protected currently.
Mr. Speaker, what action is the minister taking to ensure that the dispute is settled and the Gaynors plant stays open now that the recommendations of the DIB have been rejected?
Mr. Speaker, currently I am considering no further action on behalf of the government. The situation is that we've had a disputes inquiry board. It was held by a well-experienced man with 30 years' experience in this area. He considered the information that was given to him by both sides in the dispute. He presented what he felt, and we have to recognize his stature, presented what he felt was a reasonable series of recommendations. Those recommendations were rejected democratically by 94.6% of the employees and by 100% of the employer's side. In that case, one has to accept the decision of those people, and I can see no point in further intervention by the government at this time.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary again to the minister. Has the government discussed utilizing AOC funding to assist Gaynors workers or anyone else in financing the purchase of the plant, or is the government simply not concerned about its continued operation?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Minister of Economic Development or the Minister of Agriculture may wish to supplement this answer, but within the Department of Labour, no consideration has been given to financing by Alberta Opportunity Company of any group.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to supplement the answer of my colleague, the Minister of Labour. I'm not aware of the plant being for sale, nor am I aware of any approaches to Alberta Opportunity Company by anyone to purchase it.
Member for Edmonton Belmont.
To the Premier, to the Minister of Labour. Who has the Minister of Labour or the Premier contacted from either Labour or management to serve on the review committee that's been proposed for so long?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be proper to mention all of the people who have been approached, because obviously we will only want to mention those who have accepted and been appointed.
Member for Calgary North Hill, followed by the member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. And in the interest of removing the recent threats by the Calgary City of Council to unload what I might term catcalls on the Calgary members of this legislature, is the minister prepared to amend the Municipal Government Act to enable the city to pass bylaws to license cats?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have a particular feline for this answer. But I should say, Mr. Speaker, that the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association has tried to deal with the same issue and no doubt struggled with it in the same way as the City Council of Calgary. The response to the association, Mr. Speaker, was that some consideration would be given to clarifying the Municipal Government Act in a way which could allow the cities to pass bylaws in respect to that issue. However, I should say that no recommendation to that effect has yet been formulated for presentation to the Assembly. It is therefore, Mr. Speaker, under consideration.
Supplementary. Member for Calgary Mountain Dew.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that AUMA has been pressing the government since 1971. Why is it taking so long for it to be under consideration before bringing a recommendation to this Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, some review of the issue shows that it goes back some 800 years to the time of Henry II. And
This question is not, and the answers are not really a howling success. Member for Edmonton Strathcona, followed by the member for Bow Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question concerns a conflict of interest in the Legislative Assembly Act and is addressed to the Premier. And since, Mr. Speaker, it appears to be the position of the government that it is okay for honourable members to form small business equity corporations and then get money under the Small Business Equity Corporations Act, when will the government take steps to amend Section 28 of the Legislative Assembly Act to outlaw this and put that transaction on the same footing as transactions with Alberta Opportunities Company and AADC? Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned in the House last week, it did not appear to me that there was any conflict with the Legislative Assembly Act. That act is constantly reviewed, and if the honourable member or any other members of the legislature on either side of the House, since it is the legislation which governs their very own conduct in the legislature, have suggestions, I'd appreciate receiving them and we'll look at them seriously. Mr. Speaker, would the Premier not agree that it is all the more important to outlaw this type of transaction with SBECs, inasmuch as grants are made under that, whereas with Alberta Opportunity Company...
Order. The question is clearly out of order as it solicits an opinion.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I'll rephrase that. Inasmuch as the money that comes under the SBEC legislation is a grant, does the Premier not agree that it is all the more necessary to amend the Act, since with AOC and AADC they are merely loans?
I'm sorry, Honourable Premier, the question as framed is still an opinion. For the third supplementary, would the member for Edmonton Strathcona care to continue?
When is he going to answer the questions I asked him last week?
What plans, Mr. Speaker, does the government have, this again to the Premier, to deal with a cooling-off period for ex-ministers and indeed ex-premiers by appropriate amendments to the Legislative Assembly Act, so that he or she will not be able to make use of their knowledge gained in public service for a reasonable period of time for private profit? Mr. Speaker, even in the area of grants, as the honourable member knows, and he raises the question of the AOC and the AADC, there are a variety of grants that are made to members of the legislature, either through, if they are in farming, in the area of cattle payments, per head grants, in the area of the farm fuel allowance. There's a grant made. There's a grant made in one way or another in the area of horse racing. They are, I might say, Mr. Speaker, they aren't big enough.
Interest rebates.
In the area of interest rebates and mortgages when there was shielding. But that is generally defined in the Legislative Assembly Act, that if it's available to a class of Albertans, they should not discriminate against members of the Legislative Assembly. In the specific area that the honourable member is talking of further, of a cooling off period, as he says, it's something that can be considered, and I would be interested in knowing what the honourable member would think would be an adequate period. I should caution him, though, that the longer he is in the House, he will realize that there are many restrictions on members of the Legislative Assembly, many matters which make serving in the House difficult to accommodate for family and others, and that perhaps before making a quick judgment on this, it be given some considerable thought. And then, perhaps, if we can frame something, we would consider doing it. But I think we have to do it very carefully. We do not want to make it more difficult for members to take on the consideration of such an important function as being a member of the Legislative Assembly.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. This wasn't a grant available to everyone. It was a grant available to only those lucky enough to file in time. I'd like to ask the Premier when he is ready to answer the question that I asked him last week that he said he would take under advisement as to how many cabinet ministers or ex-cabinet ministers that have availed themselves of forming corporations to apply for the SBEC.
As soon as I have the information, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Bow Valley, followed by the member for Edmonton-Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture, and it has to do with the Canadian Import Tribunal's ruling on beef that was imported from Europe in regards to the countervail. As I understood, that report was supposed to be available on July 25th. My question is, has it been made public yet?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Import Tribunal did rule, and they ruled in favor of the cattlemen, whereby they indicated there was cause for future harm to be caused to our cattle industry, and because of that, the import restrictions and the countervail will remain intact.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, has there been a temporary countervail carried out during the time when this ruling was being studied?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there was a countervail put in place in early 1986, and that countervail will remain in place. The European Economic Community has the opportunity to appeal to GATT. It's our understanding that this appeal process can take in excess of 1 year, and for that time period, those countervails will remain in place so that it will be helpful to our Canadian cattlemen.
Member for Edmonton-Belmont.
Speaker, my question is directed to the Minister of Manpower regarding English as a second language. During the Department of Manpower estimate debate on July 23rd, the Minister commented that he shared a concern about immigrants and that this government had an English as a second language secretariat that is responsible for the coordination of provincial activities that relate to ESL. In January of 1986, the Settlement Services Area for the Department prepared a report, Comments on ESL Issues in Alberta. Has the Secretariat prepared an action plan to deal with the concerns addressed in that report?
Mr. Speaker, I should advise that yes, indeed, I am and this government is concerned about a number of programs, and as I indicated, English as a second language is a very important program to me, particularly with the constituency that has a high number of people from the ethnic community. And I have discussed with my department the various workings in the consultation process going on with that secretariat. And on a regular basis, they will be advising me and making recommendations to me that we can, as a department and as a government, react in a very timely manner with regard to issues, particularly in the area of the second language matter.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, what specific plans has the department to alleviate the potential backlog of some 35,000 immigrants requiring English language training in Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the member did indicate, we do have an ESL secretariat that on an ongoing basis recommends and reviews these matters. Along with my colleague, the Minister of Advanced Education, we work very closely as departments in dealing with the Alberta Vocational Centre and the English as a Second Language program there. I find I have been actually just a couple of weeks ago met with the president of the Alberta Vocational Centre, and we did discuss the ESL program. He did indicate to me that there is a tremendous amount of interest in that program, and I think that that all we can do as a government is continue to react to the requests made by centres like the ABC and by the Secretariat as those recommendations are made.
Period has expired. Honourable member, might the Assembly grant unanimous consent for this final set of complete supplementaries to be exhausted? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that last November there were some 1,400 people on a waiting list at ABC in Edmonton, can the minister advise how that number has been reduced and what the current number may be at?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Minister of Advanced Education, may want to supplement the answer. As a Department of Manpower, we are involved in buying the seats for people from the ethnic community, the new people to the province that are looking to take English as a second language. We are demand-driven in that regard. We do get a lot of times it's difficult to anticipate the influx of interest in that particular program. We have noticed over the last 6 months that there has been a tremendous amount of interest, and as I indicated in my 2 previous answers, Mr. Speaker, we are on a regular basis monitoring the situation and attempting to react in a very timely manner, and I can give the honourable member the undertaking that we will continue to do that.
For Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad that you're monitoring the situation. However, is a review planned or is a review presently underway to determine alternate methods of ESL to improve both access and enrollment in the classes?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member from Edmonton Belmont indicated in his first question, we have an ESL secretariat that is in conjunction with a number of the departments. And certainly I am, as is the Minister of Education, Advanced Education, continually in touch with the advice that we get from that secretariat. And certainly this is one of the issues that they're examining. And I'd be pleased to contact the Secretariat to see if they are considering alternatives, but I can assure the House that the members of that Secretariat are very hard-working civil servants, and certainly I'm sure that we can look forward to recommendations that are of a urgent nature.
Member for Calgary-Milliken, and then the final supplementary by the member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Just a final supplement. I just wonder if the Minister has had the Secretariat of ESL coordinate with I guess there's the Immigrant Aid Society, which is funded by this government, and then the Immigrant Aid or Immigrant Referral and Vocational Referral Service, which is funded, and then, as he's mentioned, under the Minister of Advanced Education, in the case of Calgary, your Alberta.
We're not here to make representations. One question is good. Thank you.
Maybe I could just wrap off quickly there. Aware of the new facility we have in Calgary-Milliken in Calgary, which is the entire floor of the Ramaco building.
The Minister care to reply?
Mr. Speaker, I also had the opportunity to meet with the Calgary Immigrant Aid Society and the Language Referral Center that is in conjunction with that. I met with the President, I met with the Director, and we did discuss in some length the ESL program. And certainly I know the location, I was there, and I'm very pleased with the quality of people that are involved in those programs that we fund, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure you that on a regular basis I meet and discuss with them issues like ESL and many of the other issues that are of concern to the ethnic community in this province.
Member for Calgary-Buffalo, final supplementary.
To the Minister of Education, is the Minister aware of any downgrading of the degree to which English as a second language is being taught in Calgary schools?
That's a new question. No, I'm not at the moment, Mr. Speaker. I would be happy to look into it and get back to the member.
Yesterday, a point of order was raised at the end of question period, which the chair took under advisement. The response has been circulated to the House Leader for the New Democratic Party and also to the member for Edmonton Kingsway who raised the original issue. Having examined the blues, I would share this following information with the Assembly as a whole. The third supplementary is given by the member for Edmonton Kingsway yesterday, July the 28th, should have been ruled out of order because of the statement, quote, to restore investor confidence, close of quote. This is an expression of opinion, and members should refer to Beauchene 357 subsection F, which reads, a question, oral or written, must not contain an expression of opinion, close of quote, and refer also to Beauchene 357 subsection H, which reads, a question, oral or written, must not contain inferences. With respect, the original supplementary question as posed by Edmonton Kingsway referred to not only the Alberta Securities Commission but also the Alberta Stock Exchange. And the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs has confirmed that a review will be undertaken regarding the Securities Commission, but no review of the Alberta Stock Exchange is contemplated. Therefore, the third supplementary question as framed was correct to refer to one body, but entirely in error regarding the Alberta Stock Exchange. As the House Leader for the New Democratic Party pointed out, I was incorrect as chairman to cite anticipation. However, the question as posed was still completely out of order. Orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to raise a point.